introduce some wonderful guests that we have here today. We have women who served in the military in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam. And these courageous women served in the 1940s and 1930s and were the precursors to the feminist movement, which came to fruition in the 1960s. And I think that we all need to really recognize what you did. You broke the mold and you did something very daring, very courageous, and we'd like to recognize you for that. I hope that you can tell us something about yourself, how this affected your lives.
My name is Joan Simon, and prior to the Air Force, I was a high school student. So at 18, my choices were 1, get married, go to college, or go to work for the telephone company. So I joined the service to see the world, and went to San Antonio, Texas for basic training, and got sent to Cheyenne, Wyoming for training as a communications specialist. And after Texas and Cheyenne, I said I'd be happy to come back to California. And so I ended up at Hamilton Air Force Base, which is where I spent the rest of my time. An incident that came up was a woman from North Carolina said she would not sleep next to a colored person. The commanding officer said, you have a choice. You could sleep here or in the stockade. That was the end of it. However, when I got to Cheyenne, Wyoming, this was still in transition. Although it was integrated in terms of the barracks and jobs and so forth, they still hadn't worked it out on the base. There was a black NCO club and a white NCO club. And of course, I had to go to the black NCO club. And I was called in by the commanding officer and told that I would not do that again. And I said, why not? And they said, don't ask questions. If you do it again, you'll get transferred. Then when I arrived in California, and my life went on, and I found myself working in a situation with, I said communication specialist. What the job consisted of was air traffic and transpiring flight plans and so forth. I worked there, and in the course of working there, someone came in, a male came in who I trained. After I trained him, he became my supervisor. I was told I'm a woman could not be in command over a male. This is not commissioned, of course, officers, it was different. After that, I was pregnant and married in that order. And mother of 4 at age 26, a single parent at age 31, and made my living as a dancer.
I'm Berkeley Gray, and I went to school in Susanville, California. Maybe some of you are aware of what it's like. It's a little town, and my teachers let me take night courses. So I took a course in navigation. And when I joined up to the Navy here in San Francisco, Eleanor Roosevelt are swearing in. So that was quite a thrill. And then I went to Hunter College, and when I took the test, they said, oh, you're going into link training, which of course I had no idea what link training was. But I did learn, and we taught pilots to fly on instruments on those little miniature airplanes that the man figured out with dogs, and a long time ago. And it was a lot of fun, and I had a great time. I was in contest over celestial navigation because we were teaching the pilots that were going out to the South Pacific. And I went all over the country and had a great time. And my brothers, a couple of my brothers were in the service, one in the Army, and the other one in the Navy. So we were all busy.
What did you do after you left the service?
Oh, hey, I lived on the corner of 15th and Broadway. And then we went all over San Francisco. And it was very nice, and then our children, 3 sons and a daughter.
But I went to the Army and served for quite a great number of years. I guess it's what I have to say.
Yeah, Hilda Roberts served as a nurse in the Spanish Civil War in Spain.
She went as a young nurse, just nursing school, and I worked on the ambulances and in various hospitals, and it was an amazing and terrible education for her. And then coming back and wanting to continue the fight against fascism, and of course there was a lot of prejudice against people who had gone to Spain to fight. And Hilda went to Australia and worked in a hospital there, and then Papua New Guinea, and worked there, and came back and was married and has a son, and got an MA in teaching nursing at UCSF.
Thank you very much. Very welcome.
I'm Leona Shapiro. My claim to fame and to being here is that I was in World War II, and I brought a couple of things to prove to you that I was really in World War II. This was our working uniform, and the elite was in a little hat that went to the top of it. It was very cute. And I assure you, after I got out, I was in 43 and 44. After I got out, I wouldn't touch brown and white at all. And this is a dress uniform. This is the hat. And this is the casual hat. When I got in at the Fort Sheridan in just outside Chicago, I immediately got into a group that was learning how to cook with dehydrated food. And there was a reason for that. And there was a lot of dehydrated food used to feed the troops. And it was unfortunate that they got that kind of food after having been in the kind of conflict that they had been in. There was something going on in Europe that was threatening to this country and threatening to take over the world. This was a different kind of world than the world in Iraq. And I felt the need to participate in it. And my brother and sister also participated in it. And the 3 stars in the window gave my parents great discomfort, but that was why. What did I do afterward? I went back to school. Of course, that was what I always did. If you didn't know what to do, then you went back to school. And that's what I did.
Leona is being very modest. She became a nutrition professor at the School of Public Health here in Berkeley.
I felt a lot like Leona here about, I had just graduated from Cal when there was the attack by the Japanese, and so what was there to do but support the war effort? And in high school, I hadn't believed that I could go to college, so I had taken shorthand and typing. And that was what I knew. I did have my AD from Cal, but, it wasn't much good for anything. I wasn't focused on anything. And so I went into, well, first of all, I wanted to join the Marines. And the Marines wouldn't have me because I wore glasses. Then the boys sort of got interested in me, and when they found out I was having some thyroid problems, they said, "Oh, we'll call you back in 6 months. Goodbye." Wow. And so, I thought, well, I guess it'll have to be the Army if I'm going to do anything. So the Army was happy to have me. I was inducted in September 1944. I opted to become a psychiatric interviewer, and I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida, from a place where there were only women to where there were 60,000 men. And so got there, the sergeant in charge said, "Oh, I don't know why they sent you here. We have too many already." So after 2 or 3 days, I was sent to what I considered heaven. I was sent to Asheville, North Carolina, which was the most beautiful place in the world. And I just felt I was so lucky to be sent there. And while I was there, I mean, it was a real education for me. I had never been out of California. I had never met a Jewish person. My family was absolutely apolitical. So here I was plunged into this sort of political world. And I met a lot of wonderful counselors, mostly from New York. And I was so impressed with them. I didn't say that I was at a tropical disease center, a military hospital unit. And it was, I'll never forget my first experience in the train station when a train full of black folk went through. And I'll never forget the signs that I saw. I heard about them, but I just didn't quite believe them. About black drinking fountain, black restroom, colored. Excuse me, thank you. I didn't think that was correct. Thank you. And I will never forget the people who were riding in the coaches. Their eyes were straight ahead. They weren't looking right or left. And it was like, and it was so silent, it was almost like a coaches of the dead. And I'll just never forget that. But it was in Asheville also that I went to my first folk music festival. Told by somebody that I would like it. I don't know how they knew because I wasn't singing then. But I went and I was hooked. And that's how I got into folk music, which became my great avocation and still is. Of course, in '45, the war was waning down, and the encampment was being deactivated. And I was given these boring jobs of working with little cards and little pieces of paper, and I complained, and I was sent to be secretary to the radio officer, and that was a lot of fun. And then when he left, I was given his job. And then when they finally decided to do away with the radio show, I became editor of the camp newspaper. When I was editor of the camp newspaper, I started a column about some man from the male side. Never thought of doing this with a woman. About we called it Man of the Week. And we interviewed him and run a story and run a 2-column picture. Well, there was one black person in our detachment, and I wanted to do a story about him. Thank you. And my super, who was a major, who had always assured me that I could do anything I wanted, said, "Oh my goodness, I'll have to go talk to the colonel about this." And so off she went, and she came back. And she said, "Well, it's okay to run the story, but the picture can't be 2 columns wide. It's got to be 1 column." And I did things I never thought of running a story about a woman. There were women. I was supposed to stay in until September of '6, but a bunch of us we were deactivated 2 months earlier, so I got out in July of '46. Shortly, and after that I went to work at the VA in Oakland, the VA hospital in Oakland. And again, working with patients. Then about 8 years later, I decided I wasn't going to do this all my life, and I went back to Cal and I got my grandchild and taught in Oakland for about 21 years.
My name is Francesca McKeon. I'm also a veteran of World War II. I joined in 1943. I was living in San Francisco. I was working for Kaiser Shipyard number 3 in the safety office. I could type again, so I was always in demand. There weren't too many of those. I had lived at 421 Powell Street. Now this is hard to imagine. It was a guest house. We used to call them guest houses. They were for young single working people. And I paid $100 a month for breakfast and dinner. And my room, and I had a roommate, and all these beautiful, beautiful lieutenants and captains and ensigns. They were going to and coming from overseas, and they all wanted dates, and so we went to places like the Mark Hopkins and the Cirque Room at the Fairmont, and places where I couldn't even get to the front door now. my brother had left Treasure Island the day after Thanksgiving in 1941. And then when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he was out there, and we didn't know where. And my mother got a letter from him. My folks didn't get a letter from him until the spring. I think it was March or April. And here I was having all this fun in San Francisco, and we thought he was probably on the Bataan Death March, because when he left San Francisco, left Treasure Island, he thought he was going to the Philippines. And I got feeling guilty, and I thought, I can't, this is not right. And so I decided to join and give up dating and just be noble and wear beautifully ugly and everything and the right thing. And I didn't realize that I was walking into millions of We're all Californians. We left from San Francisco, March 1943. And went to Arkansas for basic training, and we saw cheaters for the first time, and we saw fireflies for the first time, and so that was pretty. And I also saw lesbians for the first time. Our drill sergeant was a lesbian. Then after Arkansas, I went to Blythe, California. They sent me to Blythe, and. It was so hot there, like it was 140 in the barracks, I think. I remember going outside and sitting on the back porch, crying. I wanted my mother, and I wanted to go home. And I couldn't sleep, it was too hot, and when they only gave us flannel pajamas to sleep in. It was in the Air Force, and it was heavy bomb, B-17s and 24s. It was so hot that the mechanics during the daytime couldn't repair the planes, the night crews, because the tools were so hot they couldn't touch them. They had to wear asbestos gloves. That's how hot it was. And I remember one night we were in the PX drinking beer with the enlisted men from one of the crews, a night crew. And the next night they were all killed. They hit a red mountain and were all killed. And that made a big impression on me too. And that was very hard to take. Commanding General of the 16th Wing of the 2nd Air Force in El Paso, Texas, needed a secretary. And my shorthand and typing skills came in very handy because I got transferred. And life was much nicer from then on. I didn't pull any KP or any CQ or anything because he was the big angel. And if I had problems, I went to him and he bailed me out. And I flew with him. And I flew in B-17s and B-24s, and he was good about taking me. He took me to New York, and I visited people there. And I saw Oklahoma, original Oklahoma in 1943. It cost me $3.50. After the war, I went into journalism and became an editor and a writer, so I'm sort of verbose,
Hello, my name is Diane McKissick. I went in a little later than these women. I went in 1960 to 1964. 1944. And the uniforms, when I went in, they weren't the brown, they were green. A little bit better. Basic training at that time was at Fort Anniston, Alabama. I went there for basic training. From there I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for clerical training. She's talking about the hot weather. It was so cold in Fort Leonard Wood, and the old wooden barracks, you can see the cracks like this, and in the winter, if you put some water by your bed, it would be ice in the morning. It was so cold. From there, I went to Colorado Springs with the clerical training that I got. I was a secretary to a brigadier general. I had a top secret clearance, and I worked for NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command. I had real good duty. With the good duty, I also did not have KP or any of that. It was nice, yeah. From there, I went overseas. I went to Orléans, France for 1 year. I worked in the Signal Corps over there. And then when I came back, I got married. And then I went to work for civil service, federal government on Clay Street. I did purchasing for the Vietnam War for 14 years. And then I went to work for Alameda County Social Services for 15 years. Now, I went back in the Army, more or less. I went back to join the Veterans of Foreign Wars, where now I am the district commander for all of Alameda County, and I have 2,246 men under me. Thank you very much.
I was in from the beginning of 1942 to the end of 1944. I was in the WWII, the Air Transport Command. The Air Transport Command function was to bring supplies and planes to foreign bases. And my first place after I left basic training in Des Moines was at Palm Springs, California. The mission there was to bring the supplies to the China-Burma Indian theater, and then the military personnel would fly back and go back again. I was also stationed at Fairbanks, Alaska. The military would bring the planes up to Fairbanks, and the Russians would pick the planes up from there and fly them over the Aleutian Islands into Russia. The interesting thing about being there is that we met a lot of the Russian military personnel that would come over and fly the planes, and they couldn't speak English and we couldn't speak Russian, but we would meet in the lines going into them. And there was this big exchange of insignia, and believe me, I have a box full of pins of Lenin. Anybody want a Lenin pin? You're welcome. People have always said, well, why did you join? And I graduated from high school and had a job. You know, I think I was getting $5 a week for 60 hours work. I was a bookkeeper, and I couldn't go at night until everything was balanced down to a penny. And I figured that's a long time to work for $5 a week. Things were getting worse in the war. We didn't know too much about what was happening in Germany, but I lived in East Los Angeles, which was a very liberal community, and we had a peace club in our high school. And we would stand on street corners passing out literature opposing the war in Spain. And so I had this feeling that something was going on, and I came home and told my parents I wanted to enlist. My mother was horrified. No, you can't do that. Why? Because you're going to grow up to be a bum. I'm sorry I disappointed her. My father, being a very practical person, said, well, when she gets out of the Army, she'll get a college education, and she'll get her hospital, her veterans hospital and medication and all that. And he was right. I did go to Cal, I graduated from Cal, got a social welfare from, so thank you, Papa. And I am now using my veterans benefits at the VA hospital and medical care. And believe me, that really, the medical care, the medications rather, are very, very important and helpful. I wish everyone could get the same kind of benefits.
$7 a prescription.
$7 a prescription, right.
Get mine too.
I gave up my health plan medical, the same prescription for $7 was costing me $85. And so it's been very helpful. And after I got out, I went, as I said, I went to Cal, didn't work, got married, raised a family, and eventually, and didn't do social work, although my degree was in that. And eventually, I began teaching through a special program for women on there who needed training so that they could get off welfare and get jobs. And that was a very, very satisfying program for me. And thank you again for having us.
What Lenora isn't telling you is that she's always been politically active and was also on the Merced City Council for a couple of terms.
My name is Alice Davis. I'm English, and in addition to my accent, I had a stroke and it affected my speech. I wanted to join that right away, but my parents wouldn't give me permission, and I eventually got into the ATS, which is the Army, British Army woman. I ended up as a shorthand because I was skilled in that, and I trained in England and Wales, was finally posted to Supreme Headquarters, which is General Eisenhower's. Anyway, the Allies started fighting amongst themselves, and we all split up. We went sent to the different zones in Germany. I was in the British zone with the intelligence. I asked to go back as a civilian with the Control Commission for Germany, which we always call complete chaos in Germany. Something. And then I went back to London, and then to go to New Zealand, and the immigration scheme was sent out free if you were a British subject. But I went back to home to England to see my father, and I was going to go back to New Zealand, instead of which I was persuaded by a friend who had known in New Zealand, and she'd been through to the States, and she was working in New York. So I went to New York instead, and that was 1960. I came to San Francisco, and that's where I met my American husband.
Before World War II, if you were a school teacher, you couldn't work if you were married. You know, when you got married, you had to quit your job. You couldn't have a credit card. You couldn't drive a car without your husband's permission. You couldn't own property without your husband's permission. You know, when you think about how far we've come, and that these women who served in the military were the first to break out of that mold.